In 1952, a group of freedom fighters boarded boats in the dark. They had been trained, funded, and personally sent by British and American intelligence to liberate their homeland from Soviet control. What nobody told them, what nobody could tell them, was that the man who designed their mission had already reported every detail to the enemy. The landing coordinates, the date, the number of men. Soviet soldiers were waiting on the shore before the boats even left the harbor. Every single man was captured or killed. And back in London, the man who sent them to their deaths walked into MI6 headquarters, sat down at his desk, and opened his briefcase. His name was Kim Philby. For 30 years, he was the most trusted man in Western intelligence. He was also the most dangerous Soviet spy who ever lived. And the truly terrifying part? Everyone who knew him said the same thing afterward. He was the most genuine person I ever met. Act 1: The making of a perfect traitor. To understand what Kim Philby did, you first need to understand who Kim Philby appeared to be. Because this is not a story about a cold, calculating villain hiding behind a fake smile. That would be easier. That would make sense. This is something far more disturbing. Philby was born in 1912 into the British upper class, the best schools, Cambridge University. A father who was a celebrated explorer, a name that opened every door in the establishment. He was brilliant, he was funny, he was warm in a way that made people feel chosen, like being in his presence was a rare privilege. His friends didn't just like him, they loved him. Colleagues who worked alongside him for decades described the same man every single time: genuine, loyal, present. The kind of person you would tell anything to. And that was precisely the problem, because Cambridge, in 1934, was full of brilliant young men watching the world burn, and communism was the only fire that promised to fight back. Philby didn't dabble. He didn't sympathize from a distance. He walked into the Soviet intelligence network at 21 years old and handed them everything. Then he spent the next 3 decades making sure nobody ever found out. What followed was not a spy story. It was a masterclass in institutional climbing. Within a decade, Philby was not some low-level informant passing documents in dark alleyways. He was the head of MI6's entire anti-Soviet division. His literal job was to find and destroy Soviet spies operating inside Western intelligence. The fox was not just inside the henhouse. The fox was running it. Every Soviet agent Britain identified, Philby knew first. Every operation planned against Moscow, Philby reviewed it. Every asset Britain sent behind the Iron Curtain, Philby knew their name, their cover, and their route. And every single piece of that information went directly to Moscow. ACT-2, the lunches that killed hundreds in 1949. Philby was posted to Washington, D.C. as MI6's official liaison to the CIA and FBI. Sit with that for a moment. Britain's representative to American intelligence. The man on both sides trusted us to share their deepest secrets with each other. In Washington, Philby developed what colleagues described as the closest professional friendship of his career with a man named James Jesus Angleton, the CIA's head of foreign intelligence operations. Widely regarded as the most brilliant counterintelligence mind America had ever produced. They had lunch together, regularly. Long, relaxed, unhurried meals. Wine, conversation. The easy intimacy of two men who trusted each other with everything. Angleton shared it all. Operations, agent identities, the names of men and women working undercover behind the Iron Curtain. The CIA's deepest vulnerabilities. Philby listened carefully, remembered everything, and passed it to Moscow that same evening. The agents Angleton described over lunch were dead within months. When the truth finally emerged, Angleton was asked how he felt. He said it was the hardest thing he had ever been asked to think about. And then something broke inside him that never fully healed. James Angleton, the man specifically trained and paid to detect exactly what Philby was, spent the rest of his career destroying innocent colleagues' careers because he could no longer trust his own judgment. He saw Soviet moles in every hallway. He paralyzed CIA operations for a decade. He died bitter, isolated, and permanently haunted. Philby didn't just steal secrets from the CIA, he reached inside the mind of the best counterintelligence officer America ever produced and quietly dismantled it. Over lunch, Act 3. The thing nobody could explain. 3 times, British intelligence sat Kim Philby down and told him they suspected him of being a Soviet spy. 3 times. He left the room with his reputation intact, not because the evidence was weak, because Philby understood something about human psychology that his investigators didn't, not through aggression. Not through outright denial, through calm, measured, entirely reasonable conversation. He acknowledged the concerns. He provided innocent explanations. He made his accusers feel slightly unreasonable for having raised them at all. One colleague who confronted him directly said afterward that sitting across from Philby, looking into his eyes, he had left the room feeling more certain of Philby's innocence than when he walked in. Most people living double lives eventually fracture. The sustained psychological weight of deception cracks the surface. They start making mistakes, showing stress, slipping. Philby never slipped, not once. In 30 years, and the reason, the genuinely unsettling reason, is that there was no false self maintaining a performance over a true self. There were 2 complete selves, both of them are entirely real. The man who genuinely loved his friends, real. The man who sent those friends' assets to their deaths, also real. Both lived inside the same body, behind the same warm eyes. In the same firm handshake. That is what made him impossible to catch. You cannot detect a mask if there is no mask. Act 4 the night, he disappeared. By 1963, the evidence had finally accumulated beyond any possibility of denial. A senior MI6 officer named Nicholas Elliott flew to Beirut, where Philby was posted under journalist cover. Elliott was not just a colleague. He was one of Philby's closest friends, a man who had defended him publicly for years, who had argued against every accusation, who had staked his own reputation on his friend's innocence. Now he sat alone in a bugged apartment, waiting. When the door opened and Philby saw Elliott's face, he paused for just a moment. Then he said calmly, almost with relief, "Ah, I rather thought it would be you." Elliott looked at the man he had loved for 20 years, and he said, "I once looked up to you, Kim. My God, how I despise you now. Let those words sit." Elliott extracted a partial confession over several meetings. Then he returned to London to report. He left Philby without surveillance. On the night of January 23, 1963, Philby and his wife were hosting a dinner party at their Beirut home. He called ahead to say he would be late. He never arrived. He was already aboard a Soviet freighter in Beirut harbor. When investigators searched his apartment, they found his belongings, his books, his personal effects, and his reading glasses. 30 years. The most sustained, devastating act of deception in the history of Western intelligence. And he fled so fast he forgot his reading glasses. Act 5. The final irony. Moscow received him as a hero. Medals. A KGB pass. His face printed on a Soviet postage stamp. They also tapped his phone, monitored his every movement, and quietly suspected him of being a Western plant. The organization he had served faithfully for 30 years didn't fully trust him either. He spent his final years in a Moscow apartment, drinking heavily, sleeping badly. The ideology he had sacrificed everything for 3 marriages, his country, every friendship he had ever built, was visibly rotting from within. In 1988, Kim Philby died in Moscow. 3 years later, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. Everything he had given his life to was gone. His final wife said he died insisting he had no regrets, that he had done what he believed was right. But she also said that in his last years, he could barely sleep. We will never know if the regret was real. Philby never said. And that final, permanent silence is perhaps the most Philby thing about the whole story. The idea he died for doesn't stay up at 3 a.m. The faces do. This channel exists to show you what human psychology is actually capable of. The real version, not the comfortable one. Kim Philby was not a monster who looked like a monster. He was a monster who looked exactly like your closest friend. And that is the only kind that ever truly gets through. Stay aware. Subscribe Dark Lens for more video like this.